Hello everybody. So in this setup I wanted to explain a way to use the starter file uh, for any game that might require some sort of tile-based approach. So stuff like Bejeweled, 2048, tic-tac-toe, chess, checkers, right? Anything where you are using some sort of n by n, n by m grid, you should be able to use this as your starter file. My starting grid size is going to be 8 by 8. And so I'm going to change this real quick to grid rows and grid columns. So if you needed a 4 by 4, for example, you would change these to 4. Let's see, change the size of the board. All right. So the other thing I'm going to introduce here is this idea of a grid layout. So I'm showing you how to use it. You don't have to know how to use it essentially, but this kind of helps with the JFrame and how it manages any component that you add to it. So typically if you add any component to a JFrame, it might try to stack them, right? Well, we don't know how it's going to manage the components if you add more than one component, for example. Here we know we're adding 64 tiles onto the JFrame. And so what we want to do is just specify how the JFrame should manage those panels or those tiles. In this case, it's just going to be a grid layout. So as you add them, it's going to set up an 8 by 8 grid on the JFrame. So what we're adding to the JFrame are tile objects. The tile object actually extends a JButton class just because we want them to be clickable, right? So in the idea of chess, for example, in chess, we know that you can click any of the tiles as long as they have a piece on them, and then they react to that. And so they kind of behave like JButtons. So I guess in this project setup, I'm just using JButtons. Technically speaking, you could find other ways to incorporate mouse clicks. So let's go ahead and get going. As far as creating a tile, all you need to do is pass in the name of the image. So if you're sitting at home and you're like, okay, I don't want to import it from GitHub, quite literally just create whatever setup you need to in terms of a working Java blank project, and then just grab the 3 files from GitHub, and then including the image, and just drag them into your whatever starter project we created. And then from there, you should be able to run the runner class. So now let's set up the board. So we know we have an 8 by 8. So good news is now you get to practice your 2D array traversals, right? For int r is equal to 0, r is less than, I believe my, instead of buttons, I'm just going to change these now. So I was using buttons, but then I changed my mind. I'll just call them tiles. And so now I should be referring to tiles dot length. So that's how to grab the number of rows, r plus plus. And then we're going to visit every single column, which is tiles of, wow. Since it's a rectangular 2D array, you can just refer to the first row, or technically speaking, you can go to, row R, whatever row you're at, C++. And that's it, right? So that's a very typical loop for a 2D array traversal. So remember, since that is a 2D array of objects, those objects don't exist. We have to create them, and this is where we're creating them. You instantiate instance variables in the constructor, and these are the instance variables of the main panel class. How do you instantiate the objects? Well, you go to the tile class and look for the constructor and say, okay, it needs a file name, and that's all we need to pass in. So now we're going to go to the main panel, and we're going to go tiles of r c is equal to new tile. My file name is going to be the queen image, so queen.png. I do suggest using PNGs or any sort of file that has an alpha layer. The alpha layer is your transparency layer, so that you know, if all you want to show is the actual pixels of the pictures, then you want everything else to be transparent. Otherwise, you might have like a weird white or black background or some other background color that you don't want. All right, so at this point, we have just filled in our 2D array of tiles. We have not connected those tiles yet to the actual JFrame, and so now we're going to do that. Add the tile to the JFrame. I still got to figure out why my keyboard is being weird. So f.add. Ooh, it's like, I don't know what it's doing. So remember, we just filled in that location of the 2D array with an object. And so now we're going to go back to that, refer to that object and add it to our JFrame. Because of the fact that my frame is already set up to use a grid layout, when we click play, what we should see is an 8x8 grid of queen tiles. And that's exactly what we see, right? The other thing that we want to do is we want to add a click listener to these. So at this point, you know, we can click them because they behave like buttons, but they're not really responding to anything that we do. So now we're going to go over here and add the mouse listener, add mouse listener. So tiles of RC that add mouse listener this. So this main panel implements a mouse listener. The reason for that is because really the main panel needs to know what tile you're clicking on, so that, you know, if you need to think in terms of the entire board, you can kind of compare and contrast. Okay, what did I just click on, and how does that relate to everything else that's on the board, right? So you can think of a chess or something. Now the tile class does have a row and column. So essentially, we also need to set up the row and column for every single tile object. And so we're actually going to go ahead and do that now in the main panel. So the reason for that is, as we're adding the tiles to the board, you know, they don't know where they are in the board, right? They're not keeping track of their row and column indices. We have to tell the object itself how to set row and column. So you could add it as a constructor, I would, you know, or you can use a setter or something. Maybe we'll use a setter. Public void set row all int r int c. So this dot r is equals r, this dot c is equal to c. So as a reminder, I'm using the this keywords explicitly here because of the fact that, oh wait, these are named r and c, and then these are also named r and c. So to differentiate between the ones up here that are instance variables, right, the ones that exist within this object versus the ones that exist as parameters, you want to use the this keyword. All right, so as we are adding them, we're going to go back to that tile and set the row column. Again, you can also put it in your, yeah, as a constructor. So the other thing that I can do is I can take this constructor, I can copy it and paste it here, and then I can go int row and call. So now, because of the fact that I named these different from the instance variables, I don't have to call the this keyword explicitly. I can just do r is equal to row, c is equal to call. So there's multiple ways to set instance variables, and hopefully you guys know that by now. I'm just keeping them public for now, just to make things easy, but just know that when you import the project, they may be private, and so that means you might have to get some getters and setters. Okay, so I'm going to take this away, and I'm just going to pass in the row and column. So now I'm calling the second version of the constructor. Of course, the constructor here can definitely be cleaned up a little bit more. Essentially, we have a lot of repetitive work between this constructor and this constructor. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just leave the work to the super constructor. So I'm going to do this as file name. So what we're doing now is, so again, as you can see, there was repeated code from one constructor to the next. And I don't want to do that, right? It's not good practice to have just repetitive code copy pasted everywhere. Although I get it, it definitely gets the job done and is very quick. But by using the this keyword, it's actually going to invoke this parent constructor. It's going to do all that stuff. And then everything else that that constructor doesn't do, which is to set the run column, I'm going to do after the fact. So that should work out. So again, nothing has broken at this point, right? So we're just kind of reorganizing the code. But I just think that it's important that you know how we got to this code. Although I know that if you're trying to code line by line with me, it might be a little too intimidating. So I would suggest just kind of opening up the GitHub link and looking at the files. Then watch this video to kind of make sure you have some idea for how the setup works. And I should hurry because I don't want this to be too long. So now the click. Let's see if we can do the clicking stuff. Main panel. We added the mouse listener here, and so now let's see whether or not the mouse clicks are happening. So I'm going to go to the mouse click method down here, and I'm just going to do a system that out just to make sure that it clicks. Clicked. So whenever I press on any of these, I should now see in the console click. Okay, cool. So that's fine. But what we want to do is we want to have access to whatever we clicked on. And that's where we're going to use a couple more helper methods from the mouse event. So the mouse event will actually keep track of what component it did click on. And so we're going to grab it, the tile. So this is going to be, so we do have to cast it as a tile because of the fact that the mouse event doesn't treat it like a tile, it doesn't know what it is. We're telling it that it's actually a tile because, of course, we wrote the program. We know exactly what's inside of those things. All right, so now that I have a tile object, right? So I am interested in the tile that I clicked because of the fact that I need to know, okay, well, what kind of piece is it? Is it a queen? Is it an empty tile? Does it have data? In this case, all I want to do is see if I can print out the row and column of the tile that I clicked on and see whether or not that works. So I'm going to take my printout statement and I'm going to go the tile that row. Remember, I made them public because I just want to be able to test it right away. Okay, so again, what I want to be able to do is I want to click on a tile. When I click on a tile, I want to be able to identify what tile that is so that behind the scenes with my data structures, I can do any sort of logic for my game. If I click here, it should say 0. Awesome. So that's definitely at row 0. But we don't want to stop testing there. We want to make sure that this is also going to say 0. Good. This one should say 1 because that's row 1. Row 1, right, for all of these. And so, yeah. So now we can essentially kind of figure out what the tile is supposed to represent. And if you need to move them, you can swap between tiles, for example, figure out how to do that. But that should get you going with any tile-based game. So again, suggestion is to kind of have the files import the GitHub files into whatever system, whatever IDE you're using, and then watching this video to make sure you know how everything came to be. Thanks.